how you fundamentally view the world will change everything about your life.
What kind of recruiting questions do you ask? What kind of probing questions do you have for new recruits to determine if they're in alignment with your values?
That one little simple worldview shift changes mindset, changes confidence. How much do I need to fake in order for people to like me?
Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Chase Hughes. He's a world-leading behavioral expert. He comes from a military background. He wrote the book, The Behavior Ops Manual, and you might have seen him recently on Joe Rogan, a number of other esteemed podcasts and interviews. And we have a privilege of sharing some time with him today and asking him some deep questions on the subject of behavior as it relates to corporations, entrepreneurship, and we're just going to dive into some deep conversation with Chase. So Chase, thank you for joining us here today.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
So Chase, for one, I want to thank you for your service to our country. Most of us in our community are patriots. We're building our businesses in such a way where we do good in the marketplace and we make an impact in the world. And I want to thank you for all that you've done to keep us safe and serve our country throughout your esteemed military career.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate it. And it was my pleasure.
Thank you. And I also want to thank you for writing the Behavior Ops Manual. This is not a small book. In fact, it's probably the most extensive book that I've ever read on the subject of behavior. And as you can see by my bookshelf, I've read a bunch of them. And so I do want to talk to you about your book here today as a fellow author and as a reader myself. This looks like quite a comprehensive work. How long did it take you to write this?
To get to the point where I could write it, about 25 years. And all in writing the book is about 7 years.
7 years. Wow. Quite a journey. And we can find the book right now on Amazon and other places where the book is sold.
Yeah, and we have like the spiral bound military edition is on our main website as well. Yeah.
All right, I'm going to buy that next. I got it. There's a limited edition I can get my hands on. Amazing.
There it is.
Thank you. We're going to share links to the book and links to your website so people can find out more information. Now, in starting to read your book, I've not read the entire thing, but I've scanned it, I've dived in. You open up the book with an interesting conversation around ethics and behavioral profiling and your work. And in fact, one of the things that you cite in the book is that you're concerned about these techniques being weaponized in the wrong way. And so I thought we could start there to talk about the power of these techniques and why you put such work into talking about the ethics and asking people to actually swear to an ethical code as part of the reading of this book. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, and of course, there's no mandate. I'm not requiring anybody to send me videos or anything, swearing to anything. But I think that there was a point where I had all of these techniques getting out of the military when I retired. And I thought, if I start teaching this stuff, there's bad people that can probably weaponize a lot of it. So I had this kind of understanding in my head that 99.9% of people are good, or at least good-natured by default. And there's some psychopaths out there, some crazy idiots. But I think it changed when somebody just called me a psychological arms dealer. So where, like, if I'm a weapons manufacturer or making handguns, 99.9% people are going to use it to protect their house or, whatever, for good reason. There's always going to be shitheads. But I think at the end of the day, you make the world a better place by sharing as much information as possible and not trying to restrict it. And I think the people restricting access to information have never really been on the good side of history, ever.
Interesting. Now, has there ever been a case where you denied working with the person? It's one thing to have your book, but it's another thing to have you helping me execute and implement these tactics within my life. As you know, reading it, you probably pick up some fraction of a percentage of actually practicing it, modeling it, and working with you on a one-on-one basis. So has there ever been a case where you selected not to take on a client or an engagement based on your belief that they might use them unethically?
Many times. So I have like a mastermind coaching group that's kind of a weekly meetings and stuff like that. And we call it graduate school. And they think they're getting on a call to talk to like my sales team and stuff, but all my sales team are highly trained to just be screeners for ethics and integrity. And many times that it just didn't work out. And they have a few things that they're not all behavior profilers, but they have a few things that they need to look for and some very targeted questions that they ask to help reveal pieces of that person's personality.
Interesting. Well, I have questions on that subject in that we have a recruiting division of our company, and we also have a sales team. And one of the things I object to, and I've read many books on sales, and why I love your work so much is it's a fresh take on this subject, because so many people will tell you to use cheesy sales tactics. And there's all these modern day gurus out there on the internet telling you, if you just use these tactics or buy this program or that, you're going to get rich quick. And it's like the cheesy sales tactics have taken over, it seems like. And I feel like the consumer has become aware, and they start to sense when they're being sold, and they immediately pull out of the conversation. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you train your sales team. You talked about how you have your sales team interviewing for ethics and doing some profiling of the prospective people to work with, but how do you specifically train your sales team?
I think this may not be a soul fulfilling answer, but this is the truth. I choose the sales team based on zero skill and 100% like, would I want them hanging around my children for an entire year? Wow. I'm just based on the quality of that person's soul. Do they want the best for every single person that they meet? Or are they out for themselves? Are they willing to turn down a sale because somebody's not a good fit? I don't need to ask them that if I actually know who they are and I know them well. Because I don't ever want them to be selling, because if they're selling, that means they're convincing. If I'm having to convince somebody, that means I don't believe what I have is valuable, and I believe it may not be the best choice for you. But if I believe it's the best choice for you and it's tremendously valuable, I'm not selling, I'm offering, and I'm answering every question that you have. And that's kind of the approach that everybody takes there. And there's obviously some mammalian brain influence stuff that's going on, but that typically happens before that person gets on a call. And the salesperson's job is to deliver value. And that's the number one thing I train them in is like, we are never in any part of your imagination, we are not in any way convincing anyone to do anything. That's the opposite of what we should be doing as sales. Like, these techniques are great, but I don't think they really belong in a sales conversation, because that's where you get returns, you get kickbacks, you get bad reviews, people have bad experiences, you get people that regret making a decision.
Yeah. And as you just described, do you actually hands-on train your sales team? Are you meeting with them on a weekly basis? Like, CEO to CEO, we all know you as a public figure now, and you've taken off in your public notoriety. But on the inside of your walls, how are you implementing these practices?
So my sales team is all trained, so they're official sales training. They do use sales, of course. It's not like here's just a straight up conversation. They use some sales, but the sales team is all trained by Eli Wild, which a guy you may have heard of or may have seen. So they go through his training, and his business partner kind of runs my sales team as a whole. So, okay. And I've got a pretty decent sized sales team for the size of my company anyway. So that's the only real formal training they go through. And I make sure that their training is independent from everything that I teach, so that they have some understanding of like, this is sales, and this is like what we teach to other people. They're very different things, although you can layer those in a million times over. I don't personally train my own sales team.
Got it. And how many salespeople do you have in your organization right now?
We have between 2 and 4, depending on the product, because some of the other sales members are like for the higher end things, like somebody's wanting to join grad school, like this live mastermind weekly coaching thing with me, or somebody like looking for help on a $200 course or something like that. There's going to be different. So I would say 4 total.
4 total. Got it. Excellent. And some of you'd mentioned and I do want to dive into how you determine values with your prospective clients. But before we start there, with regard to recruiting, how do you determine values of a recruit? In the spiritual communities that we're a part of, we talk about this concept called spiritual maturity. And we actually measure for it and test for it and ask lots of probing questions to try to determine how deep a person is into their walk. what kind of recruiting questions do you ask? What kind of probing questions do you have for new recruits to determine if they're in alignment with your values and some of the other things that you're looking for?
I would say one of the most revealing questions you could ever ask anybody is just to have them walk you through any kind of stressful scenario. It was at a previous job, it may have been a relationship, it may have been a family reunion where they got into an argument, or they pissed one of their friends off and they're no longer friends, whatever it was. So they go through this description of this stressful scenario, and the follow-up question is, what is the thing you learned most about yourself throughout that interaction? And I think their level of candidness, their lack of ego, and their willingness to actually talk about themselves will shine through if you have a good candidate. And a lot of times you're going to hear, well, I learned not to trust people.
Yeah.
Or I learned that, people are pieces of crap and you got to get to know them first. Or I learned that this company is really selfish. They're out for themselves. So it's kind of like you're not just determining locus of control. You're also measuring a little bit of humility. Like, is that person willing to have humility on a one-on-one conversation when they don't know me yet, or they don't know who's interviewing them yet? Are they still willing to live outside of their ego? So really what I'm training my team when they're interviewing anybody for recruiting is how to detect when a person is in front of their eyes or behind their eyes. And that's kind of a very spiritual measure as well. So if I'm way back here, I'm kind of cloistered, and I'm very spiritual. I wouldn't consider myself extremely religious, but very spiritual. Just looking at the Bible, the most common phrase in the entire Bible is "do not fear."
Wow.
So if that person is open and comfortable, then they're going to be in front of their eyes, and it's going to be very apparent.
Interesting. I heard in some of your language from your interviews that I've watched that there was a hint of spirituality. So thank you for sharing that you're a very spiritual person. I hear you use the word soul and some of these other things. So, I was curious about that. Being that you worked in military and in some of the environments that you worked in, you'd think that those would be environments that were not very spiritual in nature. And so the fact that you have that is going to be exciting for our community to understand. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
You talked a little bit about ego. Do you think that there's two types of ego, that there's a healthy ego and there's an unhealthy ego? What's your thoughts on ego, and what are you looking for when you measure ego?
I would just define ego as a mask. Like, an ego is rooted in insecurity. Sometimes it may be posturing some kind of persona, and sometimes it might be collapsing or shrinking myself so other people feel comfortable. They're both rooted in insecurity. They're both concealing their true intentions. They're not very honest about them, and they're both lacking in composure. So I think when we say the word ego, it gets thrown around a lot, and there's a Sigmund Freud definition, there's the Carl Jung definition, and all this. I think it's how much do I need to fake in order for people to like me? And this is seeking or desiring love from strangers is one of the biggest signs of, I think, ego.
Interesting. The desire for approval, that's innate, wouldn't you think? Being that we're tribal societies and the way we're raised and parented, and we need approval in order for us to survive, right? So as part of the spiritual journey, we have to come to understanding our innate desires for approval. And why don't you talk a little bit about that? Because I ask myself lots of deep questions about my seeking for approval, when I'm doing it, when I'm not, when I'm aware of it consciously, and when I'm not aware of it subconsciously. So what are your thoughts about desire for approval?
So I think there's three desires that I really focus on when I'm looking at a person as a behavior profiler. And that is, how does a person seek significance? How do they seek approval? And how do they seek acceptance? Okay. So, and those are kind of innate in all of us. We want to matter, we want to fit in, and we want to know that we did a good job. The trouble happens when my need for approval doesn't come from my wife or my kids or my family members or my next door, the guy who lives across the street from my house, or my neighbors. It's coming from strangers on the internet. So now I'm getting dopamine. I'm getting approval from all of these people who I don't even know. And it's the same thing with acceptance. My sense of belonging should not come from social media. It shouldn't come from a place where I don't know those people, because those are natural human needs, right? We also have a natural need for water. But I'm not going to go drinking every piece of water I find on the ground or all over the world. I want to know the source, and it needs to be a good source. So everything that my body needs, I need to check the source, including all of those things that we need psychologically.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Um, so the need for, you said, approval, need for acceptance, and significance are the three things that we have to filter. So when we're looking at our behaviors, our actions, our interactions, we should be asking ourselves some probing questions on that subject. Is that what your recommendation is?
Yeah, and those, I mean, I teach people to profile human needs, and those are the first three. There's three other ones, but those are the first three human needs, and the most important. And I can identify whether someone is high up on one or high up on the other. Then I know how to speak to them. I know what words they need to hear. I know what compliments they need. So like if you're a significance-driven person, you may need to hear a phrase like, it's obvious you make a tremendous difference around here. A lot of these people look up to you, and you're going to definitely leave a mark. So that would be like a compliment a significance person needs to hear.
Got it.
And I've talked myself out of remembering what your question was.
Yeah, it's okay. I was asking about filtering of your desire for approval, desire for significance, and how one can look themselves in the mirror and ask some probing questions on that subject to determine where they're at in their walk. Because obviously, if I'm very significance driven and I'm aware of that, then I can start making adjustments and perhaps balancing it out in a more healthy way. One of the things that we often run into within our company is within our community is when people become wildly successful. They start making, they go from working really hard to making hundreds of millions of dollars a year, having a substantial net worth in cash, and having that start to change some things, right? So what are your thoughts on people's connection to money, how money changes people, how money brings out kind of the worst in people in some cases? So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think money will money will be spent based on habits we probably developed in childhood, like at the age of 8. So when I teach anybody that's going through any of my coaching, this will sound a little rudimentary, but the first thing we go through is this childhood development triangle. So when at the age of 8, give or take, in somebody's life, I want to understand in my own life, what did I do as a kid to get friends, safety, and rewards, those things. So what are the patternistic behaviors that I developed to help keep or maintain friendships, to feel safe? And some kids, to feel safe, they shrunk down. They had an abusive, alcoholic parent, so they needed to shrink and they needed to be not seen, or they're going to get punched or abused or something. And for some kids, to feel safe, all they needed to do was stand up taller or do something, maybe make social connections, and social connections kept them safe. And then when it came to rewards, sometimes rewards were recognition. Sometimes for other kids that weren't lucky, the rewards was like food or water. So what are the behavioral patterns for those three things? And those will translate. And we typically develop those patterns, we put them in the backpack, and we carry that into adulthood without knowing that they're still in the bag. That's 99.9% of people. And those will translate into adult behaviors for how we resolve any kind of conflict, disagreement, anything like that. It was friends, safety, and rewards. And then on the adult tree, so we have this, I understand myself as a kid, understand as an adult, what are the ways that I get people to make me feel significant, or the ways that I seek the feeling of significance? Is it accomplishments out here in the world, or is it that I'm a good dad? And my kids would say I'm a good dad. So where are my sources of significance? And are they coming from good source and approval and acceptance? And one of the first exercises I have everybody do that comes through my coaching is develop a dopamine map. So out of all these things in your life where you get dopamine from, you have to assign them a score, and you can only have 100 points. So if I have all these high scores for like Twitter and other things and likes on social media and getting dopamine from eating a ton of junk food, or, fill in the blank, we need to take charge of where our dopamine's coming from. And you don't need a neuroscience course or anything to understand it. Like I have all of these numbers that say I'm looking at like adult stuff on the internet that I probably shouldn't be, that might be ruining my relationship. I'm looking at um, all of these likes to measure my self-worth instead of how do my kids view me.
Yeah.
So developing a dopamine map is super easy. I draw like essentially what looks like a basketball court. There's a line down the middle and a little circle kind of in the middle. Here's all the negative sources of dopamine, all the positive ones. The positive ones should have more than 50 points. If they don't, I need to start taking away dopamine from these sources, or if not, eliminating them entirely.
That's a great framework. So 50, at least 50% on the positive side. So for example, I have clients that I mentor that they get dopamine from buying a new watch or a new exotic car. And I was on that path early in my life, and I understand where that leads to. And, and I try to encourage them to find other sources to excite them. So that's the math that you do. You have them identify those things that, that are not expansive and that, that might be lower vibrational in nature, and connect, and then look at the higher vibrational, more expansive sources of dopamine. Is that the idea?
Absolutely. And I think our culture has gotten to a place, we've been exposed to advertising and media stuff since we're tiny kids. And one of the things that does, and one of the top level things that does, and this is the guy who even designed modern day media. His name was Edward Bernays. It's actually Sigmund Freud's nephew, which a lot of people don't know. But the first line that needs to be checked off in the box, if I'm going to manipulate you and get you to conform into this thing, is I want you to start conflating and not understanding the difference between pleasure and happiness. Because so many people, we are seeking pleasure, but in reality, we think that pleasure and happiness are the exact same thing. And that is, with most of my clients, that's one of the top things that I see, is they conflate the pleasure happiness thing. Like, I'm going to get something temporary here and it should be long lasting. I just bought this badass Ferrari and 6 months later I feel nothing. Like, why am I not still excited about it?
Yeah.
Because that's a pleasure happiness differential that we need to really understand.
Wow. That's you've helped me do some psychoanalysis in real time here based on my prior lifestyle of seeking pleasure over happiness. So thank you. That's very insightful, and you've given me some things to unpack with your frameworks and your strategies. And so no doubt, you've thought a lot about this and you've helped a lot of people. Do you find that there is one particular tripwire, and I know you mentioned this concept of tripwires, that super high net worth entrepreneurs that are doing big things in the world, high impact people with a big playground, do you find one particular tripwire that they often stumble over?
You mean like once they've started making money?
Yeah, real money. Like, you're all of a sudden your net worth goes to 100 million plus, and you might have strong values and strong faith. And in that particular scenario, is there a tripwire that you often see?
One of the things that most people don't realize is we inherit way more from our ancestors than we really understand until you really start studying neuroscience and all this stuff. And you're going to see a lot of neuroscientists out there. I'm a neuroscientist, but you're going to see a lot of people out there explain all these chemical processes in the brain and all that stuff. We have nothing figured out. We have almost nothing. We know nothing about the human brain. And I think you're going to see a lot of people are unwilling to say that. We know next to nothing. We don't know really where memories are stored. We don't know what consciousness even is, or we can't explain it. And it's fundamental. And we don't even understand a piece of what it really is. So there's so much that we get from our ancestors. And we do know this for sure. We're inheriting things from our ancestors, like behavioral patterns. And I call these inherited loopholes, because they bypass our brain's ability to say, is this good for me or is this not good for me? If I'm recruiting people to join a cult, for example, I'm going to exploit all those loopholes. But if I start making hundreds of millions of dollars, I'm not really fundamentally changing. The weakness I have in some loopholes is going to be the same weakness. I just have more access to the things that will bypass my critical factor of my brain. Does that make sense?
Yeah, So what would be some of the loopholes that you see commonly that people, you said they're inherited, but what would be an example of one?
Our innate ability to remain focused on threats and value. That's the first loophole for the mammalian part of our brain.
Okay.
Then our hyper responsiveness to authority is an inherited. So this is focus, authority, and it's tribe and emotion. So my neediness to kind of feel the sense of belonging and connectedness, and to copy what the other people in the tribe are doing. And I meet so many people that think they're immune to all of this. Like, you can't sit and meditate your way out of 1,000,000 years of evolution or whatever happened. However we got here, you're not going to like think your way out of that. This just doesn't happen. So getting more aware of it and knowing that we have those vulnerabilities. The final one being like sex, and we're driven towards sex. And that's one of the biggest things that I see happen is I have so much access to cars, yachts, and all that stuff, but I also have access to this. Now people view me as the authority figure. People are I have this tribe around me, but you know what? If I went broke tomorrow, they wouldn't call, they wouldn't text. So we have an artificial authority, artificial tribe. We're generating focus in other people because we're perceived as an authority. And I think that leads to that emotional and sexual part of it, where I see a lot of people going off the deep end in the emotional/sexual part. The emotional part meaning I'm out here, I have this like really public persona, I'm a different person off camera. That's one of the biggest emotional turmoils, especially for men, where I go out on stage, I'm speaking at an event, and I act a certain way. I've got the big cool microphone on. I'm looking at myself on these giant TVs on either side of me. And then I go home and I'm a different person. I don't do what I talk about. I'm messy. I don't schedule my time very well. I don't really have composure or authority, but I'm going out and talking about it all day long. So having that difference there, that incongruence, leads to kind of an emotional empty, like a hole inside of us, and like where we feel fake, we feel imposter syndrome. And then the reaction to that is, do I have enough money to buy really good anesthetic? And sometimes the anesthetic for that is a yacht. And on the lower end, it might be an Xbox or VR glasses. And sometimes it's sex, and sometimes it is drugs or ketamine, or, fill in the blank. So typically this is kind of like boiling down to say, I'm living a life that's not really congruent with who I want to be. My dopamine's not coming from the right places, and I don't feel good. So the end result is, in any time that I have alone, or any time that I have off camera where it's just me and my friends or just me and family, my instinct is to anesthetize myself with something.
So that could be numbing, alcohol, sex, impulsive purchasing, and by the way, I had all of those symptoms when I was a young entrepreneur on my rise to success. And after going through a spiritual awakening process and doing some deep work, I've kept those at bay, so to speak, and I've gotten some authority over them. But I understand going off the rails very well based on my personal experience here that you're just describing. I did every single one of those things you just described.
Wow. And I think a lot of people do. I think it's a common story that a lot of people can identify with.
Yeah. As I was reading your book, I've been very fascinated by the subject of the discernment, this idea that as we go deeper into our spiritual walk, we learn to discern, and we learn to be able to see a person's consciousness, see the data that they're sharing with us, and being able to discern whether or not they're here to teach you a negative lesson or here to bring something positive to your life, right? There's this concept in the Bible that there's a negative force, there's a positive force, and that negative force will attempt to plant weeds in your garden, right? And so when we're interviewing people, whether it be customers, investors, potential employees, the question is this, a wheat or a weed, so to speak? Now, in reading your book, I thought to myself, if I really comprehended and understood everything about your teachings, including the index that you have at different mannerisms and so forth, your discernment level would be at a 10 if you comprehended and understood this completely. So do you have any thoughts on the difference between discernment and some of the scientific and intellectual concepts that you've mapped out? Do you have intuition, and then you utilize these concepts to understand your intuition? Kind of talk about intuition and your frameworks and your teachings here.
Sure. Yeah, that's a beautiful question. And I think on the spiritual side, like there's a lot of different ways that we can choose to see the world. And I think your worldview, how you fundamentally view the world, will change everything about your life. It will dictate your entire life. Not your goals, not your mindset. Everything will be your mindset. All that other stuff is dictated by, how do I see the world? Is the world a friendly place, or is it full of bad guys and people that might do me harm? And if I have a worldview of I'm not certain about everything, which I mean, like when you see people with a tremendous amount of certainty, I always get suspicious. So like, I don't know everything about everything, but everything's going to be fine. If you that one little simple worldview shift changes mindset, changes confidence. It changes everything that we talk about when it comes to influence. Everything that's in that book, it's broken down into all of this stuff. It's proven by science. There's a ton of, there's a huge bibliography in the book of references and stuff. But if you're looking at another person and you want me to, like, you pay me $1 million, you say, Chase, give me the best advice in the world in 30 seconds on how can I improve upon myself and not just like trust my gut. Because our guts are very often wrong. That's why con men are successful, because people go with their gut. So, and they go with their intuition. So you have somebody that's highly confident, they're going to give you a gut feeling that they're trustworthy, that they're good, they're good-hearted, good-natured people. Instead, the number one thing, this 30-second soundbite here, maybe this will be a great short, but number one thing to know how to understand another human being, is this good for me, is this maybe bad for me, is after that conversation, if everything felt like it was going well, everything was good, after that conversation, do you kind of have a come down, or do you still feel great about it a day later? Because if you felt great about it a day later, that was genuine oxytocin connection. There was serotonin there. If it was like, I had this great conversation, then the Zoom call is over or the interview's over and it's just like some crash, that's just dopamine. That's someone triggering all of your needs for what you need to hear and what you need to see. And that's when you have a come down from something like
that's powerful. So I'm measuring whether it's dopamine or oxytocin in this connection here. And that's a fascinating way to filter these relationships. Quite insightful. Thank you for sharing that. When you were earlier talking about this idea and I was thinking about this idea of trust. So what are your thoughts on the subject of trust? Because oftentimes entrepreneurs get let down. We have people join our companies and they don't work hard. They say they will. They're not highly productive. They actually have a net negative impact on our business. And we trusted them. We trusted them with our livelihoods, our capital, our teams. And oftentimes we have a hard time, especially those of us that are more spiritual, of letting people go and firing people. So what are your thoughts on trust? How do you evaluate trust? I'd love to hear your thinking on it.
You mean when I'm hiring?
Hiring within a relationship. A lot of entrepreneurs will tell me I have a hard time trusting people because they've been let down, because they've been lied to, or they've had people steal from them.
Yeah, so I think that's a big thing, especially in business. I will not stand here and say that I'm a business expert. Like, the smartest thing I ever did in my life was hire a CEO, because I don't know how to run I was the CEO. I don't know anything about business. I was a military dude. So, But when it comes to trust, we've only been burned once, and then we kind of developed this system of literally asking, how much should I trust you on a 1 to 10 scale? And how much can I trust you? And you'll see people hesitate.
Now, you'll ask a person, how much can I trust you on a 1 to 10? That's an interesting question. And they'll hesitate as opposed to saying, what's the right answer? 10?
Yeah, the average is like 100%. I'm here. I'm all in. I love the company. You can trust me 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
They won't have any discomfort with saying that. You'll see discomfort in people that lack that ability to trust. And the second step that I do is kind of a piecemeal, and this may not apply to everybody, but I want to put these people through a few tests before they rise through the ranks. I'm never going to hire them to this top job right away. We're going to start you right here on a 90-day probationary period. And because I know that you're very passionate about this, so I have no doubt that you're going to move through the ranks really quickly. But that's just this 90-day probationary period. And that seems to have completely mitigated everything, because there's a lot of, and they may not know it, but there's people in the world that maybe unconsciously, maybe they are well-intended, but I think there's people in the world that wind up being con artists because they can say all the right things and then they collect some kind of reward, like a paycheck.
Yeah.
And I think every entrepreneur in the world would benefit from understanding you need to set off every red flag in your head if someone suddenly comes into your life and it seems like they've got everything you're looking for. And it's kind of almost a forceful way that they come into your life. That needs to set off every red flag in your head. And even if it all sounds good, say, let's talk next week. Let's talk in 2 weeks. Let yourself cool off and feel that kind of dopamine come down, because that, like, if it's quick and if it's semi-forceful, we need to consider that as a humongous red flag.
Interesting. That's fascinating. I love these frameworks that you implement personally, because it just gives me, you can tell that you've tested these things out and you come to these conclusions, and, your discernment and your frameworks are hard fought, and you spend a lot of money and you've gone through probably a lot of ups and downs developing these things, particularly in business. So I appreciate them. What about the subject? We talked about trust. What about the subject of truth? What are your thoughts on truth? There's relative truth. There's universal truth. A lot of people these days will talk about the truth, and they'll talk about the truth and being truth-seeking and so forth. So what are your thoughts on this subject?
I think if we're talking spiritual or tax return,
wherever you want. What I want to know from you, what your thoughts are on the subject of the truth. What is the truth?
Okay, so I think if you and I are both looking at a shadow of a soup can on the wall, and I see a rectangle, and you're looking at a light shining from a different angle, and you say, I see a circle. What I say is true. What you said was true. The soup can is the truth.
Yeah.
So there's true, and then there's truth. And I think not very often we make the distinguished idea between true and truth, because those are two different things. And on the spiritual side of that, I am a personal believer that truth, with a capital T, can never probably be understood or comprehended by human beings.
Interesting.
I think that pursuit of that is what life is about. And that's what the Bhagavad Gita teaches us, the Hindu principles, the Bible, the Torah, every religious text kind of hints at this, even like Buddhist philosophy, even Plato, this is before the Bible, wrote about this, like pursuit of truth and pursuit of wisdom and knowledge. And I think that if we're striving for it, then that helps us to be more true by seeking truth.
I love that. That's a great distinction. I'm going to definitely implement that as a best practice. Is this true or truth? Now, what would be something that you've inspected recently on the subject of truth? Like, as we're all seeking truth, what's something that you've gone out there on an inquiry on? I'd love to hear from your perspective. What are some of the things that you've been investigating as to whether or not they're true or truth?
I think the most recent thing that we've taken a look at is this. It's kind of viral now, but it's this compilation of like 30 different elected officials holding a little microphone and going through this word for word, almost script of saying something isn't true. So it's a scripted narrative to tell you that something's not true. And I was fascinated by that, because it's not, and this happened probably 8 or 9 years ago with Sinclair Media, where you have these like 50 or whatever news broadcasts all coming up, and that was about misinformation. Mm-hmm. So it's very interesting. And one of the things that we looked into is, does an idea have to be suppressed for my idea to flourish? And if that's true, then I am not telling the truth. And I'm engaging in propagandizing and psychological warfare, psychological operations. So if I have to make people say things, or I have to suppress other ideas, then my idea sucks. And I think not too many people are really seeing that. Like, there's ideas on the right that require suppression. There's ideas on the left that require suppression. And I think one of the greatest deceptions of our entire past 300 years, almost, as a country, is getting people to believe that this is about right versus left. And
interesting.
That is a huge deception all on its own.
I want to unpack that a little bit here, because when we talk about deception and suppression of ideas, there's a nonstop onslaught to suppress certain ideas, and we know that. And you've talked a lot about that on your YouTube channel, which is fantastic. Like I watch some of the analysis that you'll do on videos on your YouTube channel, and it's one of the most entertaining channels possible, just to watch your craft. You'll watch a video and you'll say, that's not the truth, or this is this person's mannerisms, and you'll break down Putin or some other things. So for those of you watching this, go to his YouTube channel. You will watch a master at work in his craft, and it's quite a blessing to watch. How many ideas do you think the government is actively suppressing as we speak right now?
I think under 100.
Under 100, so not a lot. There's 100 that they've identified. They say we got to suppress this. The idea that COVID needs a mask or something, or didn't need a mask, for example, was one that they actively targeted to suppress.
Yeah. So the way to always determine, like, am I seeing the truth, or am I seeing a good counter argument here, is this idea being countered with other ideas or identity? So are they selling me on, this is a bad person, you're a good person. This is a bad person, which means that if you agree with me, then you're a good person. So and way, way, way too often, we're getting arguments against ideas using identity. So it's not really like facts and logic and ideas versus facts and logic. It's facts and logic and ideas versus identity and some kind of tribalism. And tribalism far, far too often has become the weapon. And if you get good at persuasion and influence, or get good at psyops, or get good at public manipulation, your number one weapon, and I don't know if I've ever said this online, but the number one weapon of influence, if you're very, very good at it, is cognitive dissonance, and understanding how to use cognitive dissonance as a tool and as a weapon.
Yeah, so one of the questions I was going to ask you, we all in our community want to change the world. If we had $100 million and we realize that there's an onslaught on identity, there's an onslaught on creating cognitive dissonance and creating it intentionally and then leveraging that. And I gave you $100 million and I said, I want to counter these negative forces in our culture. What would you do?
With 100 million?
Well, is that enough, first and foremost?
No.
No. What would you need to counter these forces?
I think, well, I'd say you could get a good start with 100 million. So the number one thing that you need is, so let's go back to how our mammalian brain makes decisions, because it makes 99% of our decisions. And somebody says, well, I can outthink my mammalian brain. Try to hold your breath until you die.
Yeah.
You can't. You're not going to overwhelm this mammalian brain. So going back to what gets the mammalian brain's attention and controls the mammalian brain. Just think of an episode of Caesar Milan, the dog whisperer. Focus, authority, tribe, and emotion, in that order. And it spells out fate to help you remember. So number one thing that you need to start garnering is focus of the people. So focus of the people. And we get focused by using novelty and some kind of social value. And social value might be celebrities kind of joining the cause. The authority is, here's all the research that backs this up. The authority is, here is these authority figures that agree with it. So you're getting more and more authority figures in there. Then you have tribe. Then we get people seeing that lots and lots and lots more numbers of people are starting to agree with this, then we get emotion. If I align with Ryan's magic $100 million team, whatever you call it, then I automatically start feeling good. And it's not just dopamine. I'm starting to get serotonin from this. Then it becomes a lifestyle instead of a dopamine agreement where I have like a buyer's remorse, but I'm bought in. I agreed to this little political identity, and now like they're doing crazy crap all over the place. I'm bought in. I have buyer's remorse, but I'm locked in. So just getting into that focus, authority, tribe, and emotion is the fastest way that you can get people on board with everything. And that would entail like kind of a step-by-step plan, but getting them involved in such a way that there is a nonstop exposure to true that leads to truth, or just pointing in the direction of truth.
Truth that leads to truth. And how many people do you think you need to actually affect change at scale as part, utilizing the framework you just described? And I'm going to go back and replay the tape here and break it down because this is quite insightful. And how many people do you think you need involved in order to get there? Obviously, you'd start with the celebrities, and then we get the scientists involved and some notable thinkers, like kind of a concept like true believer, for example. We'd work down the list here. How many people do you think we need in total to affect change at scale?
Probably 10 celebrities or 10,000 people to get it started.
10 celebrities and 10,000 people. So that would be the initial budget.
Yeah, 10 celebrities, 10,000 people. And now you have 10,000 people that have this really large voice that can allow you to reach out to more celebrities that'll attract another bunch of people.
Yeah,
so
and how would you choose your celebrities?
If they're aligned and they're agreeing in the pursuit of truth. And I would choose celebrities that have no public agenda, that are not pushing narratives all the time. Joe Rogan is a great example. Yeah. It's what I call narrative-free media, which is why people are so attracted to it, because there's so much fake crap all over the world right now. We are longing for anything authentic and anything that feels genuine and real. We won't watch 5 minutes or 15 minutes of a news show or any coverage before we change the channel, skip through the commercials, all this stuff. But they'll sit down and watch 3.5 hours of Rogan, just because we're longing, we're starving for something that's authentic and real, because everything is so fake and manufactured. We're looking at Instagram, Facebook all day long, and people are so artificial. And there's something in the back of our head that may like a reel or a video or enjoy something on social media, scrolling on a feed. There's something in our head. Our brains are trained to recognize artificiality, or we would have been dead a long time ago.
Interesting. So your belief is that there's this appetite for authenticity that's been developed as a result of the media and the lies that have been told, and the propaganda machine that we're a part of has just robbed us of truth and has depleted us depleted our reality, so to speak, of the truth and authenticity. And so when you have that, it feels different. It resonates different. People are gravitating toward it.
Yeah, and I think one of the ways that people have been through a whole lot of psyops of the last 20 years, and one of the results, the desired results of one of those psyops, and I'm not saying this is U.S. Army psyops. I'm just saying this is a psychological process. I am saying it's not U.S. Army psyops doing this. I'll go public and say that.
Okay.
But one of the desired results of that was very effective is engineering contagious apathy, to where I might see some bad news on TV, but it's going to be replaced in the news cycle 24 hours later. Even a school shooting or something horrifying like that is replaced with Taylor Swift's new boyfriend just a day later. And there's so much negative stuff happening and negative stuff getting circulated that we don't have the heart capacity, the mind capacity to feel empathy and rage and all of these negative emotions that's appropriate for all of these responses. So we're engineering contagious amounts of apathy. So we're killing outrage, we're killing that emotion. So one of the biggest hurdles that you're going to have to overcome is, number one, apathy. Number two is loneliness. And we are in a loneliness epidemic right now.
Do you think that's engineered?
Nope. I just think it's based on money. I don't think anybody sat around a marble conference table smoking cigars and kind of wrote this plan up on a legal pad. But I definitely think that uh, we're more connected than ever on social media. You and I are talking on a Zoom meeting right now, but there's something in our brain that craves a three-dimensional human being, and this does not satiate what our brain needs. So what we're receiving is a placebo
Hmm.
of connection to tribe and connection to other people, a placebo of acceptance and belonging. It doesn't exist, but it gives our brain a fake sense of it. And we see products out there coming out that can't even tell you the problem that they're solving because of loneliness. We see the
Yeah.
Apple Vision Pro, the VR goggles and stuff. You go read all those sales pages for those products, you will not see the problem that they're solving because
Yeah.
it's loneliness and what we talked about 20 minutes ago is the anesthetic. I'm lonely. This will kind of numb that for a little while. I'm going to use these goggles as some kind of anesthetic for that kind of feeling.
Yeah. Wow. You've given me a lot to think about here. I just have a couple more questions, and I want to hear your insights on the subject of AI. We're investing heavily on this. We've hired some PhDs and some scientists. Do you think an AI will ever be able to replace you?
As a profiler,
Yeah.
absolutely.
When do you think that day, or do you think that day has already happened
Oh
in the
no.
lab somewhere?
Oh no. Well, I'm involved with the lab that's actively doing it right now. But
Got it. So
um,
you're working on that project.
yes, and I think that AI is a good thing if we start understanding that we need to imbue AI with empathy and some kind of understanding of human emotion. But the things that I continuously talk about, um, like my ability to read the room, will never be replaced by AI. No matter how good of an AI you get, it's never going to happen. And my ability to communicate one on one without a computer present, and my ability to master myself. AI will not make you master yourself. You look at the movie Wall-E, that's where AI is going to lead most people. And there's going to be a very few that are segmented out that still eat healthy, still discipline themselves. They get up on time, they take care of their body. And those three things, observation, communication, and self-mastery, AI will never replace it. And for the past 5,000 years, pre-biblical times, those things have determined who's on top, who's the leader. Like they're a master themselves, they're a great leader, and they know how to read the room.
Interesting.
I think it's going to be thousands of years before AI comes close to eclipsing those three things.
So for those of us who have those three things, won't AI give us the ability to access parts of us that are dormant, that have yet to be accessed? Because I won't have to worry about, administrative work and some of the rudimentary survival things that I have to worry about in modern day society. Now, AI will invite me to go deeper into that self-inquiry, deeper into that self-mastery, maybe unlock new capacity.
Yes. And I think AI is going to reduce a lot of resistance for people, a lot of that life resistance. But I think the same thing is going to happen to those people, depending on how heavily they go into it. When astronauts come back from space, they've lost like 30% of their muscle mass because they don't have resistance.
Yeah.
So we need some of that resistance in our lives as men, as women, as anybody who wants to lead other people. You become a leader by facing resistance. And if I eliminate all of it, then you're just a little high chair tyrant, I would call it.
So you don't believe in UBI, universal basic income, and things that eliminate resistance?
I do not.
Yeah, I don't either. It was a leading question. Chase, this has been insightful. I could spend all day talking to you. I definitely want to talk to you about working with you and your organization and your different coaching programs. Personally, you've done me quite a service and our community quite a service by being here today and by sharing your time. How can people buy your book and find out more about you?
Amazon, or just go to the system that we teach. It's called Neurocognitive Intelligence, soon to also include AI, at nci.university. Ryan, thank you for having me on, man.
Thank you, Chase. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.